Mary Wing Soares, and welcome to another segment of Agenda Item. With me today is Tim Thompson, our town planner, and we are a little bit later in the month this month because we didn't have to have a meeting the first Wednesday of the month as we usually do.
Correct.
We had no new plans.
Correct.
That is going to change, right?
That is likely to change in September. I have pretty firm commitments that there will be at least 2, if not 3 applications on the agenda for September.
Terrific. We always like to see that happen because that means the economy might be
Yes.
changing, things might be happening.
I think a lot of what we've seen over the course of this summer is if you look at when the worst of the recession was, that was probably 6, 9, 10, 12 months ago. And the way our process generally works is projects go through what we call pre-application design review, and that takes some time to go through the process, work through permitting, design comments, engineering. So generally when a planning board sees a project, it's anywhere from 3 to 6 months after the initial design review application is submitted. So what we've seen now is during the worst part of the recession, nobody was submitting design review applications, which is now translating into 6 and 9 months later, no applications being ready for the planning board.
Right. But really, that's only been 2 months that we haven't had that first meeting?
It's been 2 consecutive months. I think it's
Right.
the 3rd time this year that we've canceled
Right.
the first meeting of the month.
So that's not bad
No.
at all. All right, so for our second meeting, though, we have many plans to sign.
Yeah, we've got a few plans to sign, projects that were previously conditionally approved by the board that are out now ready to move forward. Specifically, the relocation of the market basket. That project is very close to being ready to be signed. They'll be starting to do the work on that project and hopefully opening soon to increase the size of the market basket, almost double from what they have at the current facility. And then we have a subdivision off of Page Road in the northern part of town. That's a four-lot subdivision that was approved about a year or so ago. And then a project called Cake Preserve, which was off of Aviation Park Drive, which is an industrial development off of Harvey Road. This is for a landscape company and a multi-tenant commercial/industrial warehouse building.
Great.
Other than that, it'll be the usual signing of minutes from last month. If we have any new projects that come in before the meeting, we'll have regional impact determinations and then our usual discussion with staff.
Going back, though, to the plan for the market basket, when there's nothing there that's going to tell us what's going to happen to market basket where it is right now.
At this point, no. There has been nothing submitted at this time to reuse any of the space at the existing facility.
Okay, so, and they'll still be in business at the old
Yes,
facility
they will be able to keep that. That's one of the advantages to moving across the plaza is while they're working on the new facility, they'll be able to keep the existing facility open. So there should be a pretty seamless transition. Once the new facility opens up, the operations will cease at the existing facility and they'll move right in and start right up.
Okay. Now, are they going to have to do any work to the parking lot that's already there?
There's some slight modifications to that because of the small building and vestibule addition they're doing to the front of the building. So there's going to be a little bit of realignment of the drive lane right in front of the building, as well as some parking reconfiguration. But the overall number of parking spaces is still well in excess of what's required by our regulations.
Okay, and going way ahead, is your expectation that the road that's on the left of the current market basket will be cut all the way through Woodmont Orchard?
Eventually, that's the case. One of the conditions the planning board put on market basket was to come to an agreement with the new owners of the orchard parcel to make sure that there is the ability to run a road back through to Pillsbury Road at some point in the future. Before market basket can get a certificate of occupancy, that agreement needs to be in place and on file with the town.
Okay, and is there already something from Pillsbury Road that cuts into the Woodmont Orchards where this might already connect, or is
This
it?
would be something brand new. There really is no existing connection right now
Okay.
from that orchard parcel into the market basket plaza.
Right, no, I know there's none all the way through, but is there already a curb cut along Pillsbury Road that?
Outside of where
No.
the existing orchard, the old orchard building is, that's the only area where there's an official curb cut,
Right.
so to speak. The
And that's not
farmland.
aligned?
Yeah.
Okay, it's hard as you're driving down Pillsbury and, of course, as you're
Sure.
coming up 102 to see where it would meet unless you're an engineer and.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not an
from my
engineer.
understanding is that there have been surveyors out there trying to get some topography, shoot the boundaries and where the likely location of that right-of-way would be when they get to that point. So
Yeah, I did
they are
see
making
some
progress
stakes
towards
with,
that. Yes.
pink ribbon, so that's what I see. All right, so are we expecting lots of discussions with staff, or is that?
It's at this point, it's going to be a lot of just updating things that have gone on since the last planning board meeting. Nothing that comes jumping to mind right at this very moment. The
Okay.
one thing that I know will be discussed, and I have written down in my cheat sheet here, is that the Capital Improvements Plan Committee will be having their evaluation, scoring, and plan development meeting. That's going to be on Wednesday, August 18th. At 6 p.m. in the school board meeting room. That's going to be in the school board meeting room because the zoning board actually has previously scheduled for the council chambers. So 6 o'clock on Wednesday the 18th is when the committee will start looking at all the project submissions, determining their priority, and placing them into the 6-year program. Okay. And I hope that next month we'll actually be able, once we've had that meeting, to talk about it a little bit more in detail before we get into the September planning board agenda. Great,
so we'll be able to see what some of those things that have and at that meeting, not only do they hear the presentations, but the committee votes on it,
The committee will score all the projects. They'll put a priority on each of the projects and then determine which year in the 6-year program that they'll fall in. Right. And that recommendation will then go to the planning board for a workshop in September and ultimately a public hearing in October.
Okay. And it's at 6 p.m. The zoning board doesn't meet till 7. You think it's going to take more than an hour?
It's one of those things. If you go back 3 years, we had a marathon meeting that started at 5:30 p.m. and didn't end until after midnight.
Wow.
So it has been a much shorter meeting the last few years. I think the committee and the process has gotten to a point where there's a pretty seamless process. The presentations are concise. Most of these are projects that the committee has seen before, have a pretty good idea about. So.
And because of the economy, we're not seeing new
There's actually 5 new submissions that
really?
Will be brought to the CIP committee this year. One is actually for the cable studio for a building addition. We have 2 from the Elder Affairs Committee, 1 for the existing senior center on Mammoth Road, another associated with the project they want to do on Sanborn Road, and then the school department has a maintenance, the school-wide maintenance bond that they want to propose to the CIP committee. And I'm trying to think of what the 5th one was. It doesn't jump out at me.
But each one of those have to be at least $1 million for us to be looking at them, right? For the CIP committee to be looking at them.
I believe that the 2 senior, at least the Sanborn Road senior project is going to be discussed because that is a project that's going to be a little bit more near term depending on when that project actually takes place. The cable studio, I believe, will be coming in for a presentation. And I think the school department, the business administrator will do a presentation on the maintenance bond.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that, and it will be cable cast, so people can tune in if they're not able to come down to the school board meeting. That room is kind of small, so if you want to come, please come, but we will be on TV. So
absolutely, would like to see as much public input as we can through the process.
Absolutely, yep. So they could also email you, though, and you would be able to get that information to the members of the CIP committee?
My email address, Drew usually puts it on the graphics here, but just for those that are listening, it's tthompson@londonderrynh.org.
Okay, great. All right, so we have a workshop discussion.
We have another workshop discussion. The first item on the agenda this month for the 11th is continued discussions about the multifamily buildings and the number of units per building. Again, we originally had a public hearing on this back in June to reduce from 24 down to 16 across the board in our multifamily, inclusionary multifamily and elderly housing sections of the ordinance. There were a number of people from the Elder Affairs Committee that came out. That ordinance was then tabled. We had our initial secondary discussion on that last month. The direction the planning board has directed staff to look is to come up with conditional use permit language to set the maximum again at 16, but allow a conditional use permit in each of those districts to allow an expansion up to 20 provided certain conditions are met. So at this meeting on the 11th, we're going to be discussing specifically the criteria that staff is looking at to get the board's feedback as to their appropriateness, and then hopefully, if all goes well, moving to a public hearing with the planning board in September.
Now I know because we're talking about 3 different types of housing. We're talking about elderly, inclusionary, and multifamily.
Correct.
That all of those conditional approvals had to be unique to
They had to be
those
unique to
3.
the district, but the treatment of those has to be consistent based on the advice of our legal counsel. Because they're all allow multifamily buildings, you can't say in elderly you get 20, and in multifamily you get 18, and then in inclusionary you get 16. There has to be a consistency across the board in how they're treated and the number of units. The criteria that you have in terms of what you would do in the conditional use permit process to allow that increase is something the board can make unique to each of those sections. So there will be slight differences in the conditional use permit language that's presented to the board, but the conditional use permit has to be an option for all 3.
And I know we've been throwing a lot at you. Thank goodness you're here, Tim. But Was it relatively easy to make those minor
This is something unique.
adjustments?
There really aren't any other samples I've been able to uncover in any of my research as to other communities that treat them this way. There's usually a set number, and that's how they're treated. So this was somewhat of a unique, working from scratch, trying to look at a variety of different factors that would make sense in each of these districts. But I think that what we've come up with is something that's reasonable, but it is not something that's going to be an automatic for each of these projects.
Right. But, the two questions that are always asked is whether or not it's defensible and whether or not it's going to be more difficult for the developer or for the persons
Correct.
because they have rights.
There has to be a balance between the interests of the community as well as the property interests of the property owner. Property rights are one of the founding principles of this nation.
Sure.
It's one of the fundamental rights that people have. So it is a balancing act, and we hope that we've reached that right balance.
Okay. And when we look at different places, Woodmont Orchard, I mean, it's going to be a topic of discussion for the next couple of years as it gets built out. This is going to be huge on this.
This may not really have any impact on Woodmont
Okay.
Orchards, to be honest with you. And when we get to talking with our guest in the second half of the show, we may talk a little bit about some of the smart growth and new urbanism types of things. Because the Woodmont parcel and the Woodmont project is such a large parcel, the Planning Board and Town Council actually adopted what's called the Planned Unit Development Ordinance, which basically allows a developer of larger parcels of over 100 acres to master plan those projects and have that master plan be the governing zoning for the parcel, so to speak, instead of the conventional zoning that we have today. So when we go through a PUD process, there could be a completely different set of rules and regulations set up specific to that project that the Planning Board would have final say over through the PUD master plan process.
Right. Right. Well, that's good. That's great. And there'll be tons of public input for that master plan.
And
Opportunities,
absolutely.
anyway. It's up to
And
the public.
even before it gets to the Planning Board, our understanding at this point is that sometime in early September, there's very likely to be a large public charrette process that the developers were going to be putting on to basically inform the community of what their basic ideas are, to gain input from the community and try to make their best foot forward, as well as take into account what the community wants to see. So that will probably be the stepping stone from that design charrette forward into the PUD process in the future.
Good. And then the second thing?
Second item is a conceptual discussion with Londonderry Land Development LLC. These are the parcels at Exit 5 in front of the Vista Ridge multifamily development. This would be the first potential project since we rezoned that area to mixed-use commercial. At this point, we really don't have a lot of information as to what is going to be proposed. The principal of that LLC has sent in the letter requesting discussion of a retail development project, but at this point, staff has not seen any plans or any information beyond that. So my expectation is that the board will see some preliminary concept plans, whether or not there's additional things needed. Again, in that new district, any retail structures that are greater than 75,000 square feet have to meet some conditional use permit criteria.
Right.
So I believe if that's the direction that this particular developer is looking at, that will probably be the focus of the discussion as to how well the particular project would meet those criteria. Now,
did they give you any indication as to whether or not it would be completely retail? I mean, is this an opportunity for us to see some retail in apartments above?
At this point, it's too preliminary. The only thing that was mentioned in the letter was retail development.
Okay.
But obviously the zone does allow for a mixing of different uses, and that's ultimately the goal. Is we hope to see parcels along that area be primarily retail and commercial development, but for some opportunities for some small residential mixed use as well.
Okay. And what always comes up when we talk about Exit 5 is, well, what often comes up is the fact that this all started because Perkins Road was
one of the things, yes.
One of the things that was brought before the planning board, and we were asked to rezone a certain parcel to allow for this very kind of mixed use that we're talking about now.
Correct. The difference being in this particular location and where this new district is located is that these parcels were already zoned commercial and had the performance overlay district over the top of them, whereas the parcels on Perkins Road were completely zoned residential and were further up or further down Perkins Road, depending on your perspective, it would have been a complete new zone. And one of the things from their 2004 master plan was not to creep commercial development any further into residential areas, which is one of the primary reasons why the planning board and then ultimately the town council denied that project.
Right. Additionally, this parcel is on Route 28, isn't it?
Yes. All the parcels that are in our new mixed-use commercial district all have frontage on Route 28.
Right. So, I mean, beyond anything else, because Perkins Road land does not have frontage on Route 28, it would,
That's not to say that there won't be traffic impacts through Route 28. Obviously, those are things that'll be looked at specifically if it goes and moves forward through the site plan process. Because Vista Ridge Drive provides an additional roadway access to this parcel, it's very likely, in fact, I would say highly likely, that the DOT would prefer to see the access onto Vista Ridge Drive to the lighted intersection at Vista Ridge and Route 28,
Right.
rather than new curb cuts on Route 28.
right. So, again, you know, this is just a conceptual discussion. Nothing is going to be made, and no decisions are going to be
Correct.
made. But if folks live in Vista Ridge, if they live on Perkins Road, it would behoove
This is
them
a
to come.
good time to come out and get an
Yep.
idea for what people have an idea for that particular parcel.
Also, it's a great way to get to know who the developer is.
Absolutely.
And we encourage good neighbors here. So I hope people come and participate in this discussion.
Absolutely.
Yep. And that's it.
That is it. I think what we'll do now is we'll take a quick break. We'll bring in our guest. We're going to be talking with Jeff Speck, who is a professional planner and architectural and urban designer, who has written a couple of books on new urbanism and smart growth. And I think one of the things that we envisioned when we put the planned unit development process together was that we'd be utilizing some of the techniques of smart growth and new urbanism to see appropriate development from both economic development and a housing perspective that really looks at the traditional neighborhood, the traditional community centers, and something that would be something that Londonderry could be proud of in the future.
So, of course, the very first question we're going to ask him is, what the heck is new urbanism?
I have an idea, but
I know you do. So we'll take a short break and then we'll have Jeff here. Hi, we're back. I'm Mary Soares, and this is Jeff Speck, our guest. Jeff, you are an architectural design engineer?
I'm actually a city planner. My
city
training
planner.
was almost entirely in architecture, but then I went almost immediately into doing city planning. And so I actually knew Tim, you were good to not
Yes.
call me an architect, because if you call me an architect, I immediately have to issue a
Sit
disclaimer.
up straight and
because
say
because
no.
you can be sued if someone
Yes.
says you're an architect and you're not. But I do design buildings and I design towns, and most of the work I do, and thank you for having me, by the way, most of the work I do is to work with communities to help them plan themselves. Right now, for example, the reason I'm in town is I'm doing a downtown master plan for Lowell, Massachusetts. So my typical client is a city or a municipality, but in the past, and particularly when there was a much more robust economy around private development, I did a lot of plans for new communities as well.
Well, the very first thing I want to get out of the way is the fact that you look at a town or a city, and you look at the whole town or city, and then you decide this is what's going to fit for this town or city. Because when you say a city planner and you come into Londonderry, we're
Right.
a town.
Yeah, city planner, I guess, is the professional designation,
Right.
but you know, I'm AICP, it's not AITP, town planner.
Right.
But actually, a lot of us, that's the professional designation. A lot of us have been for many years calling ourselves town planners, which in the old days, particularly in Britain, where that term came into being, actually also mean they call their cities towns in England. But a lot of the work that I've done, particularly, but that most city planners do these days, is actually town scale, town density, or even in rural environments.
Right.
And you had said, you know, your next question would be, what is the new urbanism?
Yes, tell me.
New urbanism is a term that scares a lot of people in more rural areas or suburban areas, because you know they associate urbanism with grit and you know, high density and transit and all the other things that you find principally in cities. But it's really one of many terms. It's interesting how this field, which has been called smart growth, it's been called new urbanism. It's been called, for many years when I was doing it, it was called neo-traditional planning or traditional town planning. That it has different names that play better or worse in different
parts
places.
of the country.
But it's always the same principles. And
Right.
it has to do with a return to the way that we used to build communities before, for want of there are all these different nuances, but if you had to simplify the discussion, it would be, before we became dependent on our automobiles as not instrument of freedom, but as prosthetic devices. And for so many of us, the way that we've been building community in America for the past 50 years has been with this assumption that every human will have their own car. And when you build places that way, it forecloses other opportunities for creating community that we're among a group of people who have rediscovered and hopefully reinvigorated with the work that we do.
Well, for the past 2 years, we've been discussing the changes that are going to happen in our town as our town grows, because 93 is widening, because we have the Pettingill Road project coming in, and we have this huge triangle piece of industrial land that we expect will be developed and will bring in workforce housing, and so there's going to be a need for some smart development.
Yeah.
There really is. The concern that I see as a planner in our town is that we have one faction of town that comes in and says we only want 1-acre homes. We want everything, you know, to stay as beautiful and pristine as it is right now. And then we have another faction in town that's saying, yes, but I want to be able to live here, and so I want to be able to afford to live here. So I need a nice apartment. You know, I need a nice place. So how do we reconcile the two?
Well, towns can certainly make that decision to stop their growth where they are now, and to preserve.
Not in New Hampshire, not with the state legislature that we have.
Well, I'm saying, you know, they can officially even embrace that objective, but the experience has shown us that rarely are they successful in doing that. And what you see, and you know, I think we should plug the new book, but
yes, we do need to plug.
I think 1.1 of the Smart Growth Manual is that growth is inevitable, and what you see in most communities that try to stop growth is that they might do so temporarily, but eventually the pressures become too great. And by saying no growth, what you actually end up with is no planning. And then when you have no planning, when the growth then comes, it lands typically in the least planned form, and therefore the impacts that future growth have on your quality of life are much more profound and potentially negative than if you had been a little more realistic and said, you know, these things are going to come, and what form will they take?
And that's I think, a lot of what we've done with the newer zoning that we've tried to incorporate here in town. We looked at the Pettingill, the airport area, as being a prime economic development engine. We've got the apple orchard parcel that's eventually going to be developed. So we came up with these more flexible types of zoning tools. We have the new Gateway Business District, our mixed-use commercial district, and our planned unit development ordinance. And the planned unit development ordinance is really where we get the ultimate amount of flexibility, where we can basically throw out the existing zoning, develop something appropriate for that particular parcel, have the planning board and the community involved in the development of that process. So really we get what is a win-win for both the community and the development community, and something that the town can be proud of moving forward.
I think that's the bottom line, and I think that's what you're talking about, though. But it all depends on how often people will come and participate in the discussion.
Participation is key. There's no doubt about that.
Well, it's interesting, is the PUD ordinance, the Plan Unit Development Ordinance, is the tool that most of the time when I've been involved in creating a new mixed-use, walkable community, that by default has been the tool that we've used. It's a tool that actually in and of itself does nothing to control the quality of the development. But it's a tool that's sufficiently flexible that it allows for great planning, but more to the point, it implies a collaborative process between the developer and the community. And I think if you're going to make full and proper use of this tool, but also if you're going to get the ideal outcome, whatever happens on any of these PUD sites, it has to be understood as, sure, the developer may be paying for the plan, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't think of it as a collaborative partnership between the developer and the community. And certainly my experience in working on these and in advising many developers is you can't keep the community out, you shouldn't keep the community out, and in fact it's not a question of whether the community is going to be involved, it's whether they're going to be involved early on where they can help you to make the best plan, or if they're going to be involved later on when they can just sue you and stop you and ruin your plan. So it's not a question of really if, it's when. And I think most contemporary developers, at least that I've worked with, are fully aware of that. And it's very rare these days that you find a developer who's hoping to do a behind closed doors plan, because experience has shown that those are the ones that die.
Right. Well, and I think they've seen it here. In the past 10 years since I've been here, I've seen some developers come through the planning process in a very relatively short amount of time because they have done that. They have gone and come to us with a conceptual discussion.
They've done the groundwork.
Yes,
Yeah.
they've reached out to the community. They've spoken to their neighbors and found out what will fly and what won't fly, and made it work for everybody involved.
The biggest challenge these days with the public process is to get a truly representative group from the community to show up at the whatever the event, whatever the proposal is. Typically, the people who show up are the immediate neighbors, and what's good for the immediate neighbors may not be what's good for the entire community.
Right.
And so, the greatest challenge in any sort of larger property planning effort is to get public participation, but a much more democratic participation than just those people who are immediately adjacent to the property. So that's something you guys will need to work on.
Well, I think the Woodmont Orchard project is going to be the biggest project that we've seen in quite a long time. And so I think that's why it's important that we're talking about it now and trying to get people involved in that.
Yep.
When I was looking at your website, I saw some links that are not still valid.
Oh,
You might want to go back and look at those.
a friend of mine created that for me for free about a year ago. So
Well, it's a
thank
beautiful
you.
site. It's a very nice site, and I like your pictures. And theoretically, you click on a picture and it takes you to the article.
Thanks for the heads up.
It doesn't, but he also gave us a nice, on the left, he gave us a nice place that we could just click on the article and get to the article,
Excellent.
so that works. So anyway, one of the things that I thought was most interesting, and I printed it out really little because I printed like 12 pages, were your 10, what do you call those? Your 10?
I think it was originally written as a op-ed piece that appeared in a whole bunch of newspapers. It was 10 New Year's planning resolutions for mayors.
Okay.
I was from 03 to 07. I was the director of design at the National Endowment for the Arts, where we managed a program called the Mayor's Institute on City Design. And every 2 months, somewhere in America, we would pull together 8 mayors, typically from medium to larger size cities. We had Menino and bigger cities, but a typical city might be, say, a Manchester, for example. And I believe Manchester did participate. We looked at their schools. But a mayor would come, we'd lock ourselves in a room, 8 mayors, 8 designers, who I would typically pick. And the mayor would bring as a case study their most challenging plan currently underway in the city. And we would all kind of get our heads around those problems and try to solve the case studies. Through that process and literally meeting with hundreds of mayors over 4 years, it became pretty quickly apparent to me what most cities were doing wrong. And so much of my work has been, I think, what you would call remedial. Like I'm not an expert in perfection. I'm an expert in getting beyond mediocre. And most American cities are still stuck at mediocre. And so what are the things that we need to do as cities and as towns and as even rural communities to just not let the dominant patterns of development, which bring us sprawl, rule the day? And that's part of what this was
So
about.
let's talk about these, because I think they're terrific.
And they were written mostly for cities more than...
Yeah, but you see, we have a unique opportunity, as I keep saying. Londonderry will always be unique, no matter how built out we become. We'll always be unique. But because we are still relatively new, and we do have this land that's going to be developed, these 10 components are perfect for us. I love this first one: design streets for people.
Streets are, America is very different from Europe, where they've got a lot of great squares and plazas. And in America, our streets are really our public spaces. Whether it be the great main streets that you find in so many communities. I'm driving back to Lake Pawtuckaway through Derry, and that's a pretty nice main street they've got there. It's better than it was 10 years ago. Or the elm streets that so many of us have our houses along. These are great public spaces. And for many years, and this is actually the principal piece of advice, if ever a mayor said to me, what's the one thing that I need to know? It would be, and I hope I don't get into trouble here, don't let your public works department by default be the designers be the designers of your city, because the public works department in most cities has been charged with designing those public spaces, and their greatest pressure, because this is what they hear day in, day out, you can't blame them, you know, is traffic, traffic, traffic. So if we're going to design our streets, be it main streets or residential streets or anything else, around the smooth flow of vehicles, then by default they're not going to be the kind of spaces that invite us as pedestrians. So a big part of the new urbanism or neo-traditional planning has been about understanding that streets actually can do 6 or 7 things. You know, they're urban forests because they're full of trees. They of course give access to businesses and homes. They're places to, they're parking lots. You're parking on your streets in the parallel parking that's on the edge. They're places for sidewalk dining, right, in proper locations, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of things that streets can do beyond just moving cars.
And then the second one is...
Are we going to do all 10? I should
well,
brace myself.
overrule the specialist, but I think you've already said that with your,
Yep.
by not having your Public Works Department plan that. Mix the uses, which is something that we are already doing here.
Well, this refers to why you need your PUD ordinance. But the idea that, you know, communities like Londonderry, I don't know it that well, but again, I've been driving through this area for most of my life. Places like Londonderry do rural very well, but as they grow, they get worse. I'm sorry, I mean, if I say that, but if your fundamental quality is rural, and the fundamental thing that you're offering people is nature and privacy, then every new house or every new business detracts from that goal. There's a different model, which is a way to make growth so that every new thing actually adds something, and that's the mixed-use neighborhood. And if you achieve a mixed-use neighborhood where you have living and shopping and working and schools and everything else all within the same walkable environment, then every new item that you add is actually an additional amenity, as opposed to something that's just adding more traffic to your roads.
I know one of the arguments has been, I always talk about where I came from, which was Rutland, Vermont, and in that town you can still walk downtown and from your house, even if it's 2 or 3 miles away, because there's sidewalks, and even though the traffic is there and the main street is built out, it's still conducive for people walking or riding their bikes. And when we look at Londonderry, that's not the case, because we don't have bike paths, we don't have...
Because we're an agricultural community by our history, there is no real town center, so to speak, other than really the municipal complex, the schools, and the town common. There really isn't what we call a traditional downtown in Londonderry, so there has never been that critical mass of density that really is conducive to sidewalks and pedestrians.
But what was nice was the addition of the path.
Absolutely.
Which was recently added in front of, all the way down Moose Hill, and then up and around here, and then down to the middle school. So that does allow some, you know, walking and movement that way.
There's a number of things you can do in terms of just making the walk feel safer and more comfortable. But the most fundamental thing you can do to encourage walking is to have the walk be useful. And that's what mixed use is all
Absolutely.
about. Jane Jacobs said, no one will ever walk from sameness to sameness, even if the effort expended is minimal, which kind of gets to that point. But the communities like yours, which have grown up in the era of single-use zoning, have kind of prohibited themselves until now from that opportunity by mixing uses to create communities within the town where walking from thing to thing is actually possible.
Well, and as I've been becoming more of an exercise person, I mean, I've been going from one place to a purpose. I've been riding my bike from my house, which is pretty far away, to Max for ice cream. So that's been great.
That's kind of a self-canceling experience.
No. I need that calcium to keep those bones strong as I ride my bike back home. Small is beautiful, so let's explain that.
Well, small is, I forget the context of that discussion, but you know, in every aspect of our lives, there's a great book by E.F. Shoemaker, an economics text, probably from 1964 or something, called Small is Beautiful, and it really showed how when we start to supersize institutions within our communities, that's when they stop working properly. But certainly, if you're trying to create a community in which this very small, the atomic particle is not the vehicle, but is the human, then you can't let any one thing get too big. So the idea, and I don't know your story here, so I don't want to get in any trouble, but we know that, for example, that smaller schools perform better. We also know that small neighborhood schools allow kids to walk to school. So, a number of communities have consolidated their schools into fewer, larger facilities, which have certain economic advantages, but it means that now every kid has to be bused to school. So that's just one example. You can find it in almost every category of ways in which, allowing your communities to grow, not by supersizing each individual item, but by simply, in a sense, replication or cloning of the smaller items, so that no one institution or building or building site has to get that large.
And I love hide the parking lots.
That's such an obvious thing that some communities do and some communities don't. But for both surface parking lots, where the typical way to make a surface parking lot disappear is to have a slightly larger block and then you hide it in the middle of the block. But also there's probably half the communities I work in have a rule that if you want to build a structured parking deck near a city street, it has to at least have retail on the ground floor, or maybe a 20-foot thick building that separates the deck from the street, so that your experience when you're walking on the street is that you're going by stoops and windows and things that are interesting.
Right.
I always say pedestrians need to have a reason to walk, they need to have a safe walk, a comfortable walk, and an interesting walk, and I can get into each of those if you'd like. But we don't choose to walk if the walk is boring. And nothing is more boring than parking, really.
Right.
And however much you like cars, and I love cars, but walking through a parking lot is boring.
This one's going to get me into trouble. Do you know what it is?
No, I don't.
No? Save that building.
Oh. Well, that's just a discussion about historic preservation, and there's a great, he's an economist, but he specializes in preservation. I guess you call him a preservation economist, named Donovan Ripkema. And what he talks about is how, in this era in which chain stores proliferate and repetition from community to community is causing every place in America to look like every other place in America, it's those few places that can present market differentiation that will thrive economically. And most communities in America, what makes us different from other communities are our older buildings.
Now, when you make these recommendations, though, do you hope that private citizens will do that, or do you hope that the municipalities will step in and help?
Well, as I was suggesting before, everything is a partnership. But very often you're giving a community, whether it be the citizens or the leadership, the confidence to say no to a developer who wants to tear something down.
Right. Right.
And that's another one of those areas where we've tried to make strides, have hit some roadblocks, but it still is a process that's going to be ongoing. I know that the Heritage Commission is working very hard on some state enabling legislation that will help hopefully to be able to get some small tax credits or tax breaks for preserving these historic structures based on the work we did with our Historic Properties Task Force. Unfortunately, it's trying to make it work on a statewide basis instead of just the one community. That's where the rub has been, and that's why the Commission is working with the State Department of Historical Resources, other regional planning organizations and planning association, so that they're hopeful that in the next session or two we should hopefully be able to get something going at the state level.
Okay.
And I don't know the state rules in New Hampshire. I do know, just to be fair in the discussion, that in a lot of states the rules about historic preservation are so stringent and inflexible that it becomes much wiser as a developer to let a building just rot and fall down than it does to renovate it, because then you've got to put in elevators and do all this. That book, The Death of Common Sense, that came out maybe 15 years ago, I think it was about 15 years ago. The introductory example was, I believe these nuns were trying to rebuild their facility, and it ended up costing them 10 times what they had because of the the stringency of these rules. So
Right.
I don't mean to say that it's always easy or that we may not need to change some things.
Right.
But strictly in terms of looking at the, the economic viability or potential of your community, we think that historic buildings are often overlooked for their value.
Well, in reading over the rest of these, it's some of their build affordable housing, which is, we've put in some rules that will allow people to come. Well, they've always been able to build them, but maybe make it a little more
Economically feasible.
There you go. Build green, and which we.
Londonderry has always prided itself on sustainability. Again, we were one of the first eco-industrial parks in the country. We've got the ISO 14000 program that the Public Works Department's been involved with. So sustainability is something that's been a Londonderry hallmark for a lot of years. A lot of it being driven, especially since we have Stonyfield Yogurt as one of our primary corporate
Businesses.
They're
businesses.
based in Londonderry?
Yes, they
based
are.
in Londonderry.
Fantastic.
You should take a tour because you get free yogurt. It's great.
Nice. Well, that green discussion also has to do with just actual green, with planting trees and how important trees are. Often overlooked, the many things that trees do.
Yes.
But often I find, and LEED, or the other standards that exist for making buildings more green is all very useful and very important. But I often feel that we're fighting the wrong sustainability battle in the U.S., which is all about, what can I buy to add to my house to make it more sustainable, when the way that most American individuals contribute the most to global warming is driving around. So the LEED standards and other standards, I feel, don't pay enough attention to not the buildings themselves, but how the buildings are organized together to create a community in which we don't need to be driving all the time.
Right. And I think that's something that we'll see come forward with the design charrette for Woodmont.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I do want to plug the book, the Smart Growth Manual. I can't wait to read this. I just was given to it, and it looks terrific. You can read it in one
It was written to be read in one coast-to-coast airplane flight.
That's right.
But that's not very green to be.
And it's not a book. it's not a book that is geared towards professionals. It is a book that I think the layperson can read, understand the concepts that the authors are trying to put forth here.
Plus, there's beautiful pictures.
Yes. Always important.
That is. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, except I'm very excited to see how you move forward with these parcels. And again, as someone who's been coming through the area for many, many years, I would be very delighted to see a new model of growth here that allows you, because I see what's happening, for example, up in Raymond. Where just every new building is kind of just making it a less pleasant place. And I think you could really set a standard for the region by establishing this technique here.
Well, Londonderry is a leader. There's no doubt about it. I can't wait to see what you're doing in Lowell.
Oh, well, I'd be happy to share it with you.
That'd be great. Thank you so much
Jeff,
for coming.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And this is Mary Wing Soares and another episode of Agenda Item.